Hey, welcome everyone. It's 6:30, so we'll begin the meeting for this evening. Welcome and thank you for joining us to discuss the official plan review, and specifically this evening talking about where major growth will go in our future city. As a reminder, if you could please stay on mute throughout the presentations, and we'll have time for questions and discussion later. My name is Mojen Jennifer. I'm your facilitator for this evening. And before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that today we are gathered virtually on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit and the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, and the Huron people. We also acknowledge the many First Nations and Inuit, Métis, and other global Indigenous people that call Mississauga home. We welcome everyone. We're also joined tonight by Councillor Parrish from Ward 5 and Councillor Carlson from Ward 11. Thank you, councillors, for joining us this evening. And I'd like to do a quick introduction on our city staff who are here today. We have Jason Bevan, Director of City Planning Strategies, Planning and Building Department. And we have Ben Phillips, who's the manager of the official plan review, as well as Charlene Beovo, Planner and Project Lead, and Amina Menken, Planner. Our meeting producer for this evening is Jasmine Chandy. So tonight's meeting includes a presentation followed by questions of clarification, and then there'll be an open discussion on the draft policies and directions that are presented. And we'll have around an hour and a half to go through the whole meeting. However, if needed, at the end, staff can stay online for another 30 minutes following the meeting to answer any questions or hear additional comments. And just to note, so we do have an option on closed captioning if anyone needs it. Jasmine, can you turn that on now? Great, thank you. So there is a button at the bottom left of your screen if you are using your computer or a smartphone, and you can turn on closed captioning if you need it. And on the next slide, Jasmine will go through some WebEx orientation. So if you could please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen as much as possible to help maximize the number of people participating this evening. And if you're on your computer and mobile phone, you can use that chat function. You can also raise your hand if you would like to speak or ask a question. And if you're calling on the phone, if you press *3, that indicates that you've raised your hand, and then you can press *6 to unmute your phone. And I'll provide reminders throughout the meeting as well. So yes, so we talked about the closed captioning is at the bottom left of your screen. And if you would like to unmute, mute, or turn your video on and off, that's also in the middle of your screen. You should see that at the bottom there. And then on the bottom right, there's the chat function. And also if you hover over your name, there's the opportunity to raise your hand. That's another way to do that as well. And we do suggest if you would like to turn on stacked view at the top right of your corner of the screen, there should be an option there where you click on view and you select stacked view. That does help for the best way to see the presentation in the meeting today. And so yeah, so before we begin, we thank you for attending today, and we do thank you for contributing both actively, respectfully, and equitably, and we look forward to having a great conversation with you this evening. So it'd be great to get a sense of those who are attending. If you'd like to answer the poll question that's been put up, did you attend any one of the other official plan review committee meetings that happened last fall? To let us know either yes or no. And also to let us know what interests you specifically or the most about growth in our future city. So perhaps how much growth? Are you interested in the amount of growth we'll have in Mississauga, or where the growth is happening? Are you interested where it's happening or where it's located, building heights or density or other? And if you do select other, you have the option of typing your answer in the poll, or if you'd like to type it in the chat box as well, that's an option for you too. So let us know what you're interested in and if you've attended a previous meeting. Right, so we have 5 people who've attended a previous meeting and 15 who are new to the meeting. So thank you, welcome. This is your first time here. And it seems that people are interested in where growth will happen, as well as about what kind of density will happen, and also how much growth we'll be seeing. So hopefully we'll be able to answer some of these questions and these things that you're interested in throughout the event or throughout the meeting today. So before I pass it on to Ben to present on the draft policy directions, as Ben's going through his presentation, if you have any questions of clarification, please pop them in the chat box below or make a note of the slide that you need further information on, and then we'll come back to that after the presentation. And so for now, I'll pass it on to Ben to share draft policy directions with us.
That's great. Thanks so much, Mojan. Good evening, everyone. So what I'm going to do is take you through about a 20-minute presentation, just highlighting these themes about major growth as well as urban design. So in the slide that you're looking at, it's just a quick representation of the fact that every 10 years we need to update the city's official plan. So this is our key land use document for the city. So by next year, we need to do this. And one of the key elements is that the official plan must conform to new provincial and regional policies, as well as legislation. And there have been a number of changes over the past few years. Official plan policies must also align with the direction from over 30 city-initiated master plans, strategies, and action plans that have been completed over recent years. Next slide, please. So for the official plan review, we set out to achieve 4 goals. And those are the ones before you: conformity, simplify, certainty, and innovation. I already touched on conformity, and that relates to provincial and Peel region requirements. For simplify, we're looking at removing redundant and obsolete policies in order to increase comprehension and allow for actions to be more effectively taken. Also, certainty, requirements that spell out what we want with clear wording. And this really helps everyone. It helps stakeholders such as the public, council, landowners, developers, and city staff when there is more certainty in exactly what we want through this land use document. The last item is innovation. We want to have new policies that address gaps to improve the official plan. For example, we're looking at best practices from other municipalities. We also want to put a realistic lens on the OP. Planning is dynamic, it changes. So 10 years ago, the planning landscape was a little bit different. So we need to update that. So that's what we're doing now. Next slide, please. This is an overview of the official plan review timeline. We started the official plan review in 2019, and most recently in October of last year, received community feedback during virtual engagement sessions on proposed policy priorities. We're still in phase 3 of the review, continuing community engagement and sharing key policy directions. Our next step will be to start drafting the actual policy amendments as we get into presenting a new official plan. Next slide, please. To help us consider how new policy directions will affect the official plan, we identified 5 theme areas last year, and you can see them on the slide. So I'll just briefly touch on them: city structure and urban design, housing, transportation, environment and climate change, community infrastructure, and jobs. And these all feed into and relate to the vision statement of the official plan. So the next part of this presentation really focuses on the city structure and urban design icon that you see before you on the left-hand side. More simply put, it's answering the question, how will our city grow in the future? Next slide, please. the common themes shown here are taken from the fall 2020 engagement session. So I just wanted to touch on a couple of these. These are just a snapshot of some of the things that we heard that relate to growth and development, as well as urban design. There were some comments around needing more mid-rise housing, more human scale development. Also, several individuals noted the need for more housing choices in neighborhoods. But of course, we must also be careful to consider neighborhood character. And I will give a little plug for the meeting we're having next Wednesday on June 23rd that's really focusing on this whole notion of increasing housing choices. So if you haven't signed up for that, please do so. We'll have some information on that at the end of the slide deck. Also, we heard that Mississauga needs to be an attractive place to live. There were some comments around needing high quality design and also establishing a Mississauga urban identity. Some comments around protecting the waterfront and also the importance of public spaces and creating more memorable spaces. So over what you're going to hear tonight is just a summary of 17 recommendations that we have related to growth, development, and urban design. So you can find all of that information on our website. And again, we'll show you how to access that a bit later on. Tonight, we're just going to highlight a few of these key elements. Next slide, please. I really like this slide because it gives us a quick visual snapshot of the incredible growth that Mississauga has experienced really in one generation. We've grown up in a city so quickly. The image on the left, of course, is Square One, our downtown, and that image is from 1973, which was when Square One opened. So as you can see, it was surrounded by farmland and very few residents at the time. And the pictures on the right show our downtown now, and we're a dynamic and maturing city. Our years of building on what was farmland and pasture land are over, and new growth is almost entirely from infill development and redevelopment of land. So that so-called greenfield development timeline is really over for our city. Next slide, please. This chart shows the numbers behind the pictures in the last slide. So as you can see, the years of rapid population growth has slowed over the past 10 to 15 years. In the 1980s, Mississauga was adding about 80,000 new residents every 5 years. That's 4.5% each year, incredibly fast. So right now, growth has slowed to almost 30,000 new residents every 5 years, or less than 1% each year. So it's a significant drop, but we're still growing. So the numbers you see go from 1975 to 2016. We know we had our census just this year in 2021, so we don't have those numbers, but they're somewhere between 750,000 to 800,000. So essentially, we're seeing about 6,000 to 7,000 new residents added to Mississauga every year. Next slide, please. So really the point of this slide is to show that there's no major changes proposed to height and density. So the locations of height and density and growth will stay pretty much the same, and this will achieve the region's 2051 population allocation for Mississauga, and we're required to achieve that. So if you look at the chart before you, at the bottom right cell, you have a figure for the region of Peel, 2,280,000. So the province requires Peel to have that population number for Peel to plan for new growth up to 2051. Peel, in turn, has to then assign growth numbers for Mississauga, Brampton, and Caledon. And so these are draft numbers from the region. And for Mississauga, you can see for 2051, the number is just under 1 million people, 995,000. So that equates to, over the next 30 years, maybe a little over 200,000 new residents for our city. So just as a bit of a summary, on the left-hand side of the slide, you see a map. This map is out of our official plan, and really we're looking at the same type of allocation for new growth. Growth will continue to be in our downtown, our major nodes, our community nodes, our office centers, and also around transit stations. So the province calls these strategic growth areas. So that's a new term. In the current official plan, they're called intensification areas. So really the same thing. Our neighborhoods will not be the focus of new growth, but will continue to allow sensitive infill and redevelopment. So even though there aren't any major changes proposed to heighten density, there will always be ongoing land use studies that may result in some heightened density changes. And one example I can think of is the Dundas Connects master plan along Dundas Street. Next slide, please. And this image is from the Dundas Connects master plan, which really stretches across the whole city, although only a part of it is shown in this image. It really examined land use and transit potential along Dundas Street. It was approved by council in 2018. City staff are working right now on adding the recommendations from this master plan to the official plan, including land use and heights. So at a very high level, really the plan calls for mid-rise building heights, primarily along Dundas Street, but with some higher heights around Dixie and Dundas, as well as here Ontario and Dundas. Next slide, please. This slide is really to speak to major transit station areas. So these are now required by the province and the region of Peel to be priorities for growth. So the region is showing in their draft new official plan 54 boundaries around these transit stations that will have minimum densities in Mississauga. So this is a real change, that there's a delineated boundary and around all of these transit stations. So as I said, Mississauga must show these growth areas in our new official plan. So we're on the road to doing this. Maximum heights and densities will generally stay the same within these major transit station areas, and our project team is still working with the region to refine the policies and heights. Next slide, please. This table summarizes where the greatest growth is planned to occur. It really reflects what's in our official plan now, and generally is reflective of what we're proposing. So again, from top to bottom, you have higher heights and densities, of course, in our downtown core, and lesser densities as you go down this table. Downtown Fairview, Cooksville, and Hospital generally have 25-story targets in the official plan, as well as major nodes. Mall-based community nodes, we're looking for 15 stories as maximums, and although this is under appeal right now through the recent Reimagining the Mall project, and other community nodes and neighborhoods are at 4 stories. Next slide, please. Just have some other numbers for you. This chart gives us a picture of where we have been growing recently and by how much. We've been growing by about 2,500 new dwellings per year. You can see that number fluctuates, so that's kind of an average. You can see that between 2015 and 2020, over 15,000 new residential units were added to the city. So 3/4 of these were located within intensification areas. So that's the orange portion of this bar chart. And the non-intensification areas, so primarily our neighborhoods, is where the remainder of growth has been occurring. Next slide, please. This chart shows that most of the new housing in the last 15 years is in the form of apartments. So that's the orange portion of the bar chart. This is really a reverse of the decades of long housing trends in Mississauga, where most of the housing was low rise, such as singles, semis, and townhouses. So it's really an interesting graphic just to describe the change we've been undergoing. We're growing up instead of out, again, because our greenfield development has been built out. Next slide, please. So with this, I'm going to try just to explain a little bit about density. You can see the heading of the title is kind of one big area that we want to look at changing in the official plan. We want to move away from having maximum density numbers in our official plan. And right now that's expressed by what's called the floor space index. And that's really a ratio of floor area to lot area. So in the yellow box on the left-hand side, you see 0.5, 1.0, and 2.0. So let's look at the 1.0 middle graphic. So that's supposed to represent a one-story building covering the entire lot area. So that would be a floor space index of 1. So the next image to the right shows 2 stories, but only covering half of the lot area. That's also a floor space index of 1. And then the next image shows 4 stories, only being built on a quarter of the lot area. The rest of the lot area could be green space or parking. But as you can see, a floor space index of 1.0 really doesn't tell you too much about the height of the building and, of course, the resultant shadow impacts or wind impacts or the amount of sky view. It's really just telling you the volume of a building, which is not really so helpful when you're in a context, let's say a neighborhood, and you have a property that's going to be redeveloped. And this is even more extreme if you look at the images below where it says 2.0. You know, a 2-story building could be an 8-story building, all under 2 FSI. The 3 images on the right-hand side is another example of where you can have the same density number, but very different outcomes. This represents 75 units per acre. So that's another way of expressing density, the number of residential units on a set area of land, in this case, hectares. So, you know, with this number, you could have 2-story townhouses all the way up to a 19-story building. Same number of units, very different outcome, very different built form, very different wind impacts, shadow impacts. So all that to say, we want to move away from this as a number in our official plan. Yes, on some sites we do have both heights and floor space index or densities. Sometimes we just have the density figure. And even when we have both, it makes it a little difficult because it's a little bit of comparing apples and oranges and can send mixed messages. So as part of that simplicity and clarity element of what we want to do with the OP, we think that expressing things in a different way will be helpful. So next slide, please. To do that, we want to use more maximum heights in the official plan. And for example, we're proposing to create a citywide maximum height schedule so expectations are clear to everybody, clear to residents, clear to landowners, clear to developers and city council. In one way, this is an administrative change. It's pulling together a lot of the different maps in the official plan. Right now, it can be difficult to find out what is the maximum height that's permitted. Sometimes it's in text and language. Sometimes it's in a large map at the back of the official plan. Sometimes it's in a smaller map embedded in a local area plan. And in some areas, we don't say what the maximum height is. So this is, we think this is something that will be helpful. And of course, if we go in this direction, any new mapping that would show heights will be posted on our website so you can take a look at it. Next slide, please. As well as dealing with height, we want to use minimum design requirements more frequently in the official plan. And two that we're thinking of more specifically of is design, in terms of design requirements, are for minimum tower separation distances and 45-degree angular planes. So right now, these are already in our design guidelines, but those are separate documents and they don't have as much weight as the city's official plan. So these new requirements will help us achieve better transitions between low-rise buildings, such as two-story homes, and taller buildings. You know, in the example on the right side of the screen, this is called an angular plane. By specifying that we want to have a 45-degree angular plane, which is a very common urban design tool, it lets everybody know what the expectation is, ensures that there is enough sunlight coming through, reducing shadow impacts, reducing privacy concerns and overlook potential. So again, this is the direction we want to go towards. We also plan to strengthen other urban design policies related to quality of design, pedestrian experience, and sustainable development. Next slide, please. We are considering residential land use designations that are height-based instead of density-based for a lot of the reasons I just went over. This is almost more of an administrative change, but we think it's important as it just goes to this whole thought of clarity, simplicity. You know, right now, if you see on the left side of your screen, everything is expressed in density, such as low density 1, low density 2, high density, medium density. On the right-hand side, we're proposing low rise, mid-rise, and high rise. One of the benefits will be really giving a land use designation where mid-rise buildings can be built. We really don't have that in Mississauga. In our medium density designation, that's reserved for townhouses. So there are cases where we've you know, modified that a little bit, but right now our designations really speak to low-rise housing such as detached homes and high-rise buildings. So we've looked at other municipalities. They're going in the same type of direction, several of them. So we think this is maybe a way to go. Next slide, please. Another area we want to look at is retail in neighborhoods, and specifically mid-size malls. There's about 40 mid-size neighborhood malls in the city that are at least 1 hectare in size. And the image that you're looking at is one on Central Parkway in Burnethorpe. I think it's the Central Parkway Mall. So it's just an example. So staff are proposing new policies for mid-size malls in neighborhoods that would guide redevelopment. So right now, these are all designated as mixed use, which means you can have commercial and residential. But right now, the heights are limited to a maximum of 4 stories. And we recognize that this is not really realistic from a land use planning and land economics perspective. We believe that mid-rise can be appropriate for these sites, these larger sites. And so we want to have proactive policies before the development applications come in. And we also want to add some other policies related to things like building transition, mix of uses, character streets, open space. Right now, we really don't have that direction and framework for these mid-sized malls. Next slide, please. This is just an example of really what a 6-story building could look like. So again, we're suggesting maybe 6 stories is appropriate as a maximum height for mid-sized malls. This is the Regatta. Some of you may know it, residential building with, I believe there is some retail at grade in Port Credit. And it goes from 3 stories, stepping up gradually to 6 stories. Just to give you a kind of an idea of kind of the size and massing of a stepped 6-story building. And again, it's really an example of the right hand of the screen when you have this graphic on angular planes. Next slide, please. We're almost done, just a couple more slides. This is kind of another retail discussion or direction we're looking at. So we were just talking now about mid-size plazas and malls. We're also taking a look at smaller convenience plazas, and we're considering removing the residential permissions that already exist in our official plan for convenience commercial lands. And I mean, just as a little bit of a background, we recognize that small retail plazas in neighborhoods are important if we want to have day-to-day shopping needs within walking or biking distance of our homes. And so we want them to remain in place. We don't want to have policies that maybe encourage redevelopment by permitting residential uses. We do have policies that say, hey, if you do redevelop, you need to maintain the commercial, even if you add residential. But what often happens is there is a reduced amount of commercial space when you do that. So there's pressure on reducing that commercial space. So again, it's another policy direction. We're putting it out there. And yeah, next slide. So we really would love if you would review the full set of recommended policy directions. So this is the website link to our official plan review page, which includes the major growth memo. Certainly you can contact me at any time. My email is here, and this presentation will ultimately be published on our website.